If you're a volleyball player in season, here are 4 steps that you can use to ensure that you stay healthy, get more athletic, and ultimately improve your performance in volleyball. What's up guys, my name is John Evans, and in today's video, I am gonna go over how I treat athletes in volleyball who are in season and still wanna jump higher and get healthy. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to identify what you're doing and when you're doing it. For example, if you're a volleyball player and you have AAU and you're in season and you're doing all of this skills work, then you're probably jumping 5 to 7 days a week. Now this is already way past the recommendation of something that I would give an athlete who's training to jump higher, whether they're out of season or in season. I think that 7 days a week of jumping is far too much. So an example of this is you're jumping Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now the next thing that you need to do is you need to compare the max load capacity of that athlete for a given joint. So for the example of the Achilles, I would maximally load that 3 to 4 days a week. Now if you're jumping 7 days a week, then you're already far in excess of the maximum load capacity of an athlete for the Achilles tendon. For the patella tendon, I might maximally load that 3 times a week. Now this does depend on the athlete. Some athletes can jump more, some athletes can jump less, and it comes back to their given load capacity. So you need to compare that athlete's max load capacity to what they're currently doing and see how far they're underneath that given load capacity. The next thing that I would do is I would create a checklist based on the goal loading. Now, if I'm a coach and I want an athlete to jump higher, there are a couple ways that I go about doing that. I'll typically implement 2 to 3 days a week in the weight room of high intensity lifting, and that includes Olympic lifts, back squats, multi-joint movements that are high intensity and high intent. This improves the type 2 motor unit recruitment. It improves type 2 fiber size. It can improve the tendon efficiency and capacity, which they are elastic. There's no metabolic cost for them. And so increasing their stiffness is going to benefit the athlete. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I am going to create that checklist and fill in the gaps where that athlete may be missing out on addressing certain needs that are gonna help them jump higher and be a better athlete and stay healthy without adding too much that goes above their given capacity. So on the other side of this board, I have created a checklist for you guys as an example of what I would do for an athlete who is in season and a volleyball player. So the first thing that I would do is I would only load knee extension strength work 2 to 3 times a week. Now I wrote 2 times a week here, but if you're a volleyball player and you're already doing 2 to 3 days a week because your AAU coach or your team coach is asking you to do strength work 2 to 3 days a week of squatting, that's a knee extension exercise. Lunging, leg extension, all of those are knee extension strength exercises. Then you're already checking this box for knee extension strength work. So I don't need to add in any more knee extension strength work to your training because you're already doing it in season with your coach. Now, if you're not doing that, then I'm probably gonna need to add in some function of knee extension strength volume. For athletes in season, that's typically gonna be in the form of slow squats so that they can stay healthy. But again, if that athlete's capacity is such that they can jump 5 to 7 days a week and do 2 days a week of strength work, then we're gonna do that. The next thing that I put here is phase 4 tendon loading. Now I like my athletes to maximally do phase 4 tendon loading specifically on the patella 2 days a week. I don't like to go much above that, so I wouldn't have an athlete do 4 days or 5 days of plyometrics and 2 days of max effort jumping because that's gonna fall into the category of phase 4 tendon loading. Remember, phase 4 tendon loading is anytime the tendon is going to stretch and shorten very, very quickly where it's storing energy and releasing energy. So if you're a volleyball player jumping 5 days a week, I am already checking that box 2 times over, almost 3 times over. So I don't need to add in more phase 4 tendon loading to your training because you're already addressing it maximally that I would for an athlete that's out of season. Now, the next one is sprinting. Are you sprinting 2 to 3 days a week? Volleyball players typically are not getting any true acceleration development volume. Now, the benefit of this is that it doesn't necessarily load the patella quite as intensely as maximal 2-foot jumping. And so as a result, you can afford to do a little bit more training in the form of sprinting. So this is a checkbox that isn't being checked. And so I can prioritize some of the training on this sprint volume. So this would be something that a volleyball player should be adding to their training when they're in season because they're probably not addressing it whatsoever. The next one is going to be change of direction work. Obviously, as a volleyball player, if you're on defense, you need to be able to change direction laterally, forwards, backwards, to get into position, to pass the ball to the setter, and then obviously set up a good hit so that you're able to score points. That said, you're probably getting 2 to 4 days a week of change of direction work in your sport. I don't need to add in any more change of direction work. The maximal amount that I would do for an athlete out of season, best case scenario for maximal adaptation, is 2 days a week. You're already getting that in your sport. We don't need to be addressing this. One thing I'd like to add is this is based on a needs analysis for a volleyball player and things that they probably should be doing in their training out of season to get more athletic, jump higher, and ultimately increase their chances of scoring points, getting on the court, and making it to a high level of competition. Next, we have posterior chain strength work. I maximally load this maybe 3 days a week. I've put 2 times a week here, but posterior chain is probably not getting addressed thoroughly in volleyball players. Jumping is inherently anteriorly dominated. If you were to look at the anterior chain, all of those muscles in the anterior chain and tendons in the anterior chain are getting loaded really intensely in jumping. Now, when you kick out on your penultimate step, you are going to stretch your hamstring and your glute and your gastroc, but it's probably not seeing quite the loads that you're gonna get on the anterior chain, and it's definitely not to the maximum capacity that your posterior chain can handle. Now, if you were a sprinter or you were a track and field athlete, you're probably getting a lot of posterior chain work and you probably don't need to add a lot more strength volume. But if you're a volleyball player, this is an easy area where you could add a lot of volume and it's probably not gonna be detrimental and could potentially be additive to your performance in season and something that you could improve on. So again, we could add some volume to posterior chain strength work. Next, we have accessory work. Now, this would be accessory strength work. We're talking about areas that aren't necessarily a multi-joint movement or a prime mover where you're getting a lot of neural stimulus, you're getting a lot of type 2 fiber recruitment, and you're potentially going to see a lot of specificity. Now, this isn't to say that these exercises don't help you improve, but they're probably single joint. They're probably not going to be something that if you only did, you're gonna see crazy improvements in your health or vertical jump. However, that doesn't mean that they're not important. Some examples of this might be side band walks, seated calf raise, it may be some hip flexor work, maybe potentially working on some posture with the low back and intra-abdominal muscles, things that you don't necessarily get overloaded in the sport of volleyball, but you will benefit from improving your capacity around those areas. And even more so, you could potentially do a complex progression in periodization where you implement strength speed work, speed strength work, move into elastic work, or play around with contraction types going from super maximal eccentric to maximal isometric and so on. And you're able to see these impressive changes to those tissues that ultimately help you become a better athlete in season, and then out of season, you've improved on maybe weaknesses or strengths to a point where you're becoming a better athlete in season and out of season. So this is an area where we can put a lot of our focus for in-season volleyball players, and it's not gonna exceed their max load capacity. It's probably gonna help them be a better athlete, and we can dedicate a lot of time to it and ultimately have that athlete improve in the long run. The last checkbox that I would want an athlete in season or out of season to do is going to be doing isometrics every day. Now, this is an easy way that you can add volume to your training that is going to increase your robustness, as well as ensure that you're able to get through the season healthy and potentially improve your tendons quality throughout the season or throughout the year. So if an athlete is not doing these isometrics every day, which typically they are not in season, then this is an easy place that you can add 5 sets of 45 seconds 3 times a day and see a lot of improvement in tendon health and potentially improve your performance across the season. That said, guys, one other thing I'd like to add is when it comes to this accessory work, this posterior chain work, this spring and the isometrics, you're able to build in periodization models inside of this. So maybe I can't implement maximal eccentric loaded squats on the down phase or weight releasers, or I can't use complex systems where I'm doing, maybe a depth drop into a maximal back squat. I can build that into the other areas that aren't at the capacity, the load capacity of that given athlete, where it potentially could improve performance. It's not necessarily as specific or doesn't mimic jumping quite as much, but you can see adaptation to the nervous system, you can see adaptation to the prime movers, and there's a lot less of a risk to getting injured by doing that. I would potentially maybe do that with the posterior chain work, with RDLs, maybe potentially with some seated calf raise or standing calf raise, areas where that athlete has a much higher capacity. I can afford to add volume there without much of a risk and ultimately improve their performance in season and out of season without disrupting a good annual plan. So that's it, guys. That's the video. If you're a volleyball player and you are looking to get more athletic and you maybe want me to do this for you, then consider going to THPStrength.com and signing up for coaching. Thanks for watching, guys. That is the video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys tomorrow.